All right. So for this class, you will need 2 yoga blocks. I have a yoga strap. I don't know that we'll use it, but I have it just in case. And then I have a single dumbbell, anywhere from light to heavy for what we're using it for. You can kind of decide. And then if you are uncomfortable being on your knees, have a blanket close by. And we will start the class lying on our backs for our somatic practice, our exploration of movement. And with this exploration of movement, we are kind of priming our body for what we're going to use for the entirety of the class. And you all can stay down. I'm just going to kind of point out a few things so that they make sense when I say them. What we are kind of targeting today is this connection from your core over the front of your hip and down your leg. And we've had other classes where the more you create tension, tension is a good thing, right? So the more you stretch, lengthen, the stronger that line of tension will become. We'll also a little bit target on the side of the hip, but also starting from the waist and then down the outside of the hip and down the leg. So with that in mind, we'll come down onto our backs and start with the knees bent. And fidget so that you feel like you have an even amount of weight on the back side of your pelvis. You feel the lower back soften towards the floor, the lower part of your rib cage soften towards the floor. And then go ahead and stretch your legs long. And just begin, as we begin so many of our practices, just becoming aware of both sides of your body separately. So noticing your feet. And do you feel your feet turn out or turn in? Or maybe they go straight flat towards the floor. Just kind of notice what your feet do. And then notice side to side. So is there a difference between your right foot and how close it is to the floor and your left foot? And then start to track that up the legs. So noticing the lower legs, the knee. And noticing each side of the pelvis. Do you feel more weight or more heaviness on one side of the pelvis compared to the other? Notice the lower back region. Do you feel one side of your lower back is further away from the floor than the other? And tracking that into the ribs, the bottom of the ribs. You can track this from the front or the back. Do you feel that your ribs kind of flare up? Or do you feel they soften towards the floor? And tracking all the way up to the shoulder blades and the back of the head. And then visualizing your spine resting on a balance beam. If you were on that balance beam, which side do you feel like you would fall towards? Or not? Maybe you feel perfectly balanced. And then bring the legs a little closer together so they don't have to zip up together, but maybe heels in line with your sit bones, toes pointing up towards the sky. And start first by just flexing and pointing the ankles. And you might feel that as you do this, the heels kind of go through digging in the mat a little bit. And you can go as slow or as fast as you prefer. But as you feel that transition between flexion and extension in the ankles, notice how it kind of rocks the whole body. So can you feel the backs of the calves on the ground? Can you feel the pelvis rock up and down, maybe the shoulder blades and even the head? And if you can't feel that, dig the heels into the ground, the backs of the heels into the ground a little bit more. And we're going to start to point and flex fast. So dig the heels in and just point and flex your ankles both at the same time, really fast. And maybe now you start to feel yourself kind of pulsing up and down or towards the feet and the head. It's hard to track up and down when you're lying on the ground, but if we think of down towards the feet and up towards the head, you're kind of tractioning and rocking in those two directions. And do just a few more. And then let it go. Let your legs roll out comfortably and just check in side to side. Notice if anything has shifted. Notice what other sensations you feel in your body. Like, do you feel a pulsing or vibration or heat? Or I feel like my calf muscles worked really hard. So we're going to do this same thing, but one side at a time. So start with the right toes pointing up. Bring your hand to that region right in front of your hip, kind of with part of your hand in your lower belly, and maybe your fingertips resting on the fronts of your thigh. And then just start to point and flex just the right ankle. So reaching the ball of the foot towards the floor and then pulling your toes towards your shin. And again, you can go as fast or as slow as you want. But as you start to stretch toes towards the floor, notice what happens to the tissue, the skin, the muscles where your hands are. Notice the fingertips and what's happening in the thigh, and notice the heel of the hand, what's happening in your belly. Just take a couple more, feel it stretch up into your low back, side of the waist. And then pause and let the leg roll open. Each time I do this, I'm becoming very aware of how much work this is in my calf and the front of my shin muscle. And bring your right leg pointing straight back up again. Keep your hand where it is and start to now windshield wiper the foot in and out. So start just by pulling the foot toes in towards your midline and then out towards the outer edge of your mat. And notice, do you feel anything happening under your hand, first of all? And if you don't, make sure you're not just turning the ankle in and out. Feel as you turn your toes in and out that you're rolling the whole leg in and out. And notice what happens to the bone. You might feel that bone rolling in and out, but more importantly, notice what happens to the tissues on the front where your hand is. And then move your right hand to the outside of your right hip and notice it from that area as well. You might feel it in your lower back. And then the next time you rock out, just let it rock out. And again, check in. Compare right side to left side. And now we'll go to the left side. So bring your left hand with the heel of your hand resting inside your hip point. So it's right in your lower belly region, and the fingertips resting on the front of your thighs. Point your toes straight up and start to point and flex your ankle. And if you're like me, the first few times I do this with one leg, my heel kind of just slides on my mat. So I really have to concentrate on digging the heel down so that I can feel that full movement happen all the way up. And on this side, I even feel it going, like my head is moving a lot, my shoulders moving a lot, my rib cage is moving a lot. And I find it interesting that that was different on the other side. It kind of stopped with my pelvis on the right side. Just a few more. Noticing the tissue under your hand. Notice how as you point and flex on either end, the tissue kind of gets stronger, tenser, stiffer, and then let it go. And check in. Another interesting thing that I just noticed when I did that is my right side of my lower back, which tends to be higher off the floor, just settled down towards the floor as I finished working the left leg that way. So I find that's interesting. All right, so now we're doing the windshield wiper. So bring the hand back if you moved it. Start to turn the toes in and out. And remember, it's the whole leg that's rotating. So if you flex your ankle strongly, it kind of helps to isolate the movement to the whole leg rather than just the ankle. You might feel the sensation of the leg bone rolling to hit the hand as you roll in and roll out away from the hand as you roll the toes out. And then switch the hands to the outside of your hip and just check in with the sensation there. And then let it go. Check in. Notice your breath. Notice your balance beam. And then you can bring the hands wherever you want. You can leave them on the ground. We're going to point both toes up. And we're going to start by drawing circles to the right. So both feet turn to the right, then they point down and they come up through the left. So dig both heels in as you draw these circles. So it's kind of combining both the flexion and extension with the windshield wiper, the outside movement. And I notice a big difference here. My right leg feels like it's really strong, and my left leg is kind of just going around for the ride. And then switch directions. I do feel my head kind of going in a circle with my feet. So just notice what you feel. We're not just tracking the movement, we're tracking how the movement shows up in our body. I also really want to flare my ribs, so I'm kind of just going with whatever happens. And now bring both toes towards your shin, take both toes out, down and in. So once you get the motion going where you're now making open circles and coming back through, how does that show up in your body slightly differently than making circles in the same direction? So now we're basically making opposite circles and then switch directions. I'm tracking a lot of differences side to side. And then let it go. It's amazing how much work that is in my lower legs. But as I was making the circles, I also felt a lot of work happening in my quads and my hamstrings. And in that area in the front of the hips and the sides of the hips. Bend both knees. Take the arms wide and just let the tension go by rocking the knees side to side. So wind chilling both knees to the right, and then wind chilling both knees to the left. And keep your heels in line with your hips, hands down beside your hips. So we're moving into bridge pose. We do a lot of bridge pose, and every time I introduce bridge pose, it's a different way. This time we're going to think about pushing as we lift. We are going to lift by pushing the knees out over the toes. So we are lifting knees, push out over toes, feel that stretch on the front of your hips, and then release down. So initiate the movement by pushing the knees out over the toes, feeling that stretch in the fronts of your hips. And just do 3 to 5 more, moving at a pace that works for you. And I'm kind of pausing at the top just to kind of check in with what each of the front of my hips feel like and noticing if I feel a difference. Wherever you are, do 1 more. And then lower the hips. Keep your left foot on the ground. Bend your right knee and interlace your fingers in front of your right knee, but let the knee turn out slightly. So instead of pulling it straight in, let the foot come in slightly and the knee track out slightly. So I'll show from this angle in case it's hard. I'm kind of rolling it in a little bit. And I am holding my knee in with my hands. And allow your leg bone to kind of sink into the back of the hip socket. And then lift your left leg off the ground, straighten the leg above your hip. If you can't straighten above the hip, just take it a little further down. So move the back of the rib cage towards the floor. And we're going to move slow with the toe pointed. So point the toe really hard. And only take the leg as low as you can. Keep the back of the rib cage on the floor. So you're lifting and lowering. But as you start to lower, think of creating that space in the front of your hip that you felt when you were kind of digging your heels in and stretch. Imagine that tissue. And a stretching and creating that tension, good tension, stability tension on the front of your hip. If you feel a pop in your hip or your low back, as long as there's no pain, it's actually pretty typical, not normal, but typical. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. 1 more. And then lift the leg up, bend the knee, and drop both feet to the ground. Windshield wiper the knees side to side. And as you reach one knee towards the opposite side, see if you can feel that stretch by reaching the knee down towards the front edge of your mat. So instead of just dropping the knees side to side, can you reach the knee down as you drop it in? So we're going to go to that same side. So lift the right knee up again. This time we're going to do no hands unless you feel you need your hands. We're going to reach the hands down on either side of our hips, not on the ground, but stretching the fingers towards the front edge of your mat. And then curl your head and your chest off the floor. Bend the left knee up, straighten the leg. Now your low back is pressing into the floor. This time, flex your ankle strongly. So pull the toes towards the shin and lift and lower. And notice the lifting and lowering with the heel flexed or the ankle flexed compared to toe pointed. And maybe you go to toe pointed for a few reps and see which one gives you more stability in the hip and in the spine and core. Let's do 2 more. I like flexed. Good. Pull both knees in. Drop the left foot down to the ground. Hands down beside your hip. Keep your right knee where it is. And we're going to go to single leg hip bridges. So same way we practice the 2-legged hip bridge. To lift, think of pushing the knee over the toe to lift and lower. Lift and lower. Maybe bringing your left hand to the front of your hip to just see, can you feel that stretch of tissue as you push the knee out over the toe? And then can you also think of creating a little bit of length in the front of your left hip? Even with that hip inflection. 1 more. And then lower. Separate your feet about mat distance apart. Windshield wiper the knees side to side as you do. See if you can find that lengthening across the front of the hip, all the way out through the knee. Good. So now we'll go to the other side. So pull your left knee in first. First round, we're going to interlace our fingers around the front of our left shin and allow the knee to roll out and the heel to roll in slightly. Bend the right knee in and straighten the leg above the hip. For this round, the low back is not necessarily pressing into the floor. Think of moving the rib cage towards the floor instead. We're going to go opposite this time. So we're going to flex the ankle on this one. Only go as low with the leg as you can keep the back of your rib cage on the floor. So you don't have to go that low. But as you take the leg towards the ground, think of creating more space in the front of your hip. Lengthen across the front of the hip point, down into the front region of your thigh, and help to create that by stretching through your heels. So you feel that full line of tension all the way from maybe even the low back or lower belly area of the core. Next time you lift the leg, bend the knee, bring both feet down. Windshield wiper side to side. So maybe that side feels different than the other side. If you chose to keep your head on the ground and hug your knee on the first side, maybe you make that same choice, or maybe you're like, actually, I felt stronger on this side. I'm going to try the other variation. It's always up to you. So first start by lifting the left knee. Pull it in with your hands so that you're going into that deep hip flexion. And then can you create a little bit more space in the front of the left hip? And what that feels like to me is that I am kind of moving my tailbone towards the ground. And then bring your right knee up. Reach your hands on either side of your hips, curl up Straighten your left leg. And now we're going toes point to lift and lower. And monitor how low you can go, keeping tension along the front of your hip. And maybe a few with the ankle flexed. And just decide, which do you like better? Do you feel like you get more stability with the toe pointed or with the ankle flexed? Draw both knees in. Bring the right foot to the ground. Keep the left knee where it is. Hands down beside your hip, single leg hip bridge. Pushing the knee in the direction of your right toes. Lift up and lower. So maybe bringing your fingertips into that region between your lower belly and the top of your hips. Can you mimic what you felt happening when you were doing that first practice? And then check in with the left hip. Can you think of also creating space, even though the knee is bent? Can you think of creating tension from the lower belly to the top of the thigh? One more. And then release hips to the ground, feet wide. Windshield wiper your knees side to side. Get that extra little stretch as you reach the opposite knee in. And then roll to either side and press yourself up. So we're going to come to hands and knees to give that a little bit of a break before we go into creating tension again. Toes touch, knees wide. Just press your hips back as far as is comfortable for you. I know for some, this is not a comfortable position. So only take the hips as far back, and even if it's just like way up here, just walk your hands further forward and see if you can create release by pushing the hands forward. And then shift back to tabletop. So wrist underneath your shoulders. Spread your palms wide. You always have the option to go to knuckles with the wrists flat, or use both of your blocks for your elbows. So anytime the wrists bother you, those are options. And take your right leg straight back. So as you take the right leg back, tuck the toes under. And just pause here to see, can you create a little bit more length, but also tension in the front of your hip? And when you do that, do you find that you're pushing the toes back more, so the ball of the foot back more, or do you feel like you're pushing your heel back more? And maybe test by allowing yourself to kind of rock forward and back. And notice where, when you rock forward and back, which part creates more of that stable feeling on the front of your hip. And then stay in whatever one creates that tension. And you're just going to lift your right leg about an inch off the floor and pause. Keep creating that tension in the front of your right hip. And then lower the knee back down. And bring the right knee beside the left knee. Sit back on your heels. Give your wrists a break. And if sitting on your heels is not comfortable, whatever is comfortable to rest before we do round two. And maybe watch for a second so you can see what we're doing. I'm going to demonstrate with the other leg so it makes a little bit more, you can see a little bit better. So we're going to do the same thing on the same leg. We hover and then we lift back. We hover and we never collapse, right? So we're trying to keep that tension as we go from a variation of down dog. We're trying to create all of that movement in the front of the right hip. So we'll do 3 to 5, kind of gauge with your own body what feels good. So take your right leg back, maybe rock forward and back or up and down, whatever that means to you, to feel what line of tension creates more stability in the front of your right hip. And then lift your left leg off, kind of create that same awareness in the left hip, and then shift back, and then shift forward. So explore this a few more times, just feeling, can you pull yourself back by that sensation in the front of your hip? All right, it looks like you're done. So we're going to bring the left foot up between the blocks. So we're going to continue to work on that right leg. So tuck the right toes under. You have your hands on the blocks at a high height. I will show this from both views. But as you start to lift your right knee off the ground, think of reaching through your heel to lift it. So the knee comes off the ground. And then that same thing we did in plank. Push the ball of your foot towards the back of the mat. Feel what tension that creates, and then push the heel back. Notice which one creates more stability on the front of your hip. So does pushing the balls of your feet towards the back of your mat create more strength and stability, or does pushing your heels back? I'm going to try balls. I typically go to the heel, but I like what pushing the balls of my feet is doing. And then I'm going to lift my hands off the block. Keep pushing back either through your heel or the ball, whatever created that stability on the front, and then reach your arms over your head. So whichever one you decided, bring your awareness to that and either scrape the balls of your feet back, which when I do that, my heel comes further away from the floor, or push the heel back. What creates more strength here? And then keep that, bend your left knee to where the thigh is almost parallel to the ground. And then move your right hip forward as you draw your left hip back. So I'll say that again. The back leg, move that hip forward as you pull your left hip back. Take one more breath. And then bring your hands back down to the block. You're going to lower your right knee to the ground. You're going to bring your left knee to the ground in front of your right knee. And then you're going to swing your left leg around. So the leg that's been straight the whole time is still straight, right? So my left knee is on the ground and my left heel is behind my hip. My right toes are facing the long edge of the mat. And I'm going to decide, do I want my hand on a block? And at what level? I'm going to go medium height for me. And bring the weight more to your hand and lift and lower the right leg off the ground by trying to create that tension. The only thing that should be moving is the hip joint. So if you feel that you're kind of rocking forward and back, can you think about creating that tension along the front of the hip, either by flexing or pointing, and also the side of your hip? One more. Bring the foot down. We're going to come back towards the front of our mat. Drop both knees down on the ground. And reach your hips back. Good. So we're going to shift to the other leg. I'm going to face forward this time so you can get a different perspective. I won't until after the planks.
Hey, Barbara, you might want to move to a wall because I saw that you might need the extra support. Just a suggestion.
A wall can be really good to push the foot into too. It can give more stability. All right, so let's go to plank. So just the left leg goes back now. Keep the hips squared towards the floor and just start to point and flex the ankle. And you'll feel yourself rock forward and back or up and down, whatever that means to you. But as you do that, really feel just pushing the ball of the foot back, rocking yourself forward, create more stability, or heel back. And then decide which one you like. And then lift and hover the right knee off the ground. So either press the heel back or press the ball of the foot back. Take 1 or 2 more breaths. And then release the knee to the ground. Knees together. Then sit back. Give your wrist a little break. So now we're moving between the plank with the knee bent to down dog, knee up. So the knee that's hanging, the left knee, kind of goes around, along for the ride, right? But you are keeping a slight bit of flex tension in that left hip as well. So come back to hands and knees. Wrist under your shoulders, knees under your hips. Step your left leg back. Find the one you want to use to create tension. Hover, right knee off the ground, then shift back. Shift back to plank. And then shift back into that down dog. The left knee is going, right knee going along for the ride. But there is a bit of tension pulling the leg in towards the core. And then take a break. And we'll take the blocks. Bring the left foot up between the blocks. I like to start with my knees or my feet, knee, whatever, about hip distance apart, so I have a little bit more stability. And then tuck the right toes under. Keep your hands on the block, lift into that runner's lunge. If you need the feet further apart, do that. And then start to feel. Do you feel like you have more stability by pushing through the heel? And you're tracking stability on the front and the side of the hip and waist. And once you feel you have your stable zone, we're going to move the Left hip back and start to rotate the right hip forward with our hands in the block this time. So left hip pulls back, right hip rolls forward, and then creating either the heel reach or the ball of the foot reach, lift up. And in this position, we're not collapsing into this front hip. We're either shoving the ball of the foot towards the back of the mat or reaching the heel towards the back of the mat. And then again, left hip pulls back, right hip rolls forward. And maybe bend into your front knee a little bit more. And then bring both hands down to your blocks. Drop the back knee to the ground. You're going to bring your left knee to the ground as well, but it's going to be slightly forward of your right knee so that you can roll open into that gate pace. So to do that, the left foot swings behind you as you straighten your top leg. And then decide, are you using a block and which height? I like a little bit of block here when I'm lifting and lowering my leg, but I'm going to keep my hand on my waist this time. And I'm going to try to keep my waist wide. So I'm not squeezing my waist to lift my leg. I am either pointing or flexing and creating tension along the front and the side of my hip to lift and lower the leg. Maybe one or two more. Good. Bring both knees together. And then take them wide and sit back. If child's pose is not a relaxing pose for you, choose something that feels good in your hips, your knees, and your core. It doesn't have to be child's pose. Shift forward to hands and knees. Cross your ankles and sit your hips back towards your heels. And then bring your legs out in front of you. So knees are wider than shoulders. Knees are bent at 90 degrees. So if I look here, you can see from my ankle to my knee is one straight line, right? So my heels are not more narrow than my knees. They're as wide as my knees. Lean back on your hands. And then you're going to roll just one knee in at a time. And right now, I'm not moving my pelvis. So I'm just trying to move the leg bone and the hip socket. And how I track that is I feel my sit bones stay connected to the ground. So as I drop a knee in, I want to make sure that sit bone does not come off the floor. I'm just kind of noticing how each leg moves. And then the next time I drop my right knee in, I'm going to roll all the way to the left. And then I'm going to come back through center, and I'm going to start to reach through the front of my hip to bring my left knee to the ground. So see if you can create this movement by reaching through the knee and the front of the hip. And the next time you rock to the right, stay facing the right. I'm going to shift so you can see me a little bit better. My right knee is in line with my right hip. My knee's bent at 90 degrees. My left knee is in line with my left hip. There is a tendency, watch me for a second, to bring this left knee forward. Don't do that. So you want to keep the left knee back. If this is too much, you can bring your right foot in, but make sure the knee and hip with the left knee makes a straight line. And then you're going to come down onto your right elbow. My right elbow is in line with my right hip. So it's not forward in line with the knee. It's in line with the hip. So you could draw a straight line from my left shoulder to my left hip to my left knee. Bring your hand to your left hip, and you're going to lift the left leg off the ground. And then you're going to straighten the left leg, keeping and bend it, but keep the knee where it is. So sometimes it helps to bring, I like to bring my left palm into my left thigh, the front of my left thigh, so that I can feel that my thigh is not moving. I'm just bending and straightening my left knee. As you straighten it, so take it straight, keep it straight, and now point and flex your ankle. Good. Stack the left knee on top of the right knee. Bring the knees back slightly. And then you're going to lift the hips off the ground, but you're going to do that by lifting the hips in line with the knees. So as you lift, the hips come forward. And then as you go down, the hips go back. Press the hips forward. So squeeze the glutes as you lift, and then reach the hips down and back. Good. Now bring the feet and the shins together. So my right foot is wrapped around my left knee, and my left knee is closed pretty deeply. We're going to come into that shin box. So you're going to lift up onto both knees. Bring your hands out in front initially to lift, and then come all the way up. Move the hips back. Hands can come to the ground to help you sit down. So hands can come forward, but at the top, press both your hips forward, really concentrating on that left front of the hip. And if you feel you can do that without hands, you're creating that tension along the front of the left hip, especially to help move you up. Last time. Good. And bring your hands to the ground and step your right foot forward. Tuck the left toe under. Hinge forward. Straighten your left leg. And then step all the way up. So we're going to move into the strength portion of our practice with some traditional kind of strength moves. If you have a chair, you can use a chair. You can also stack 2 blocks. My suggestion is to take the blocks up against a wall. So we're going to do Bulgarian split squats. And I would prefer that your thing that you have your foot on does not move. But it might be enough to have them on your mat. If you like it a little higher, you can use a chair. And I'll demonstrate it with a chair so you know that option. We'll do the first set without weights. So the same leg we've been working with long is the left leg. You're going to take it and place it on your blocks. If you have blocks, my suggestion is tuck the toe under. If you have a chair or the couch, Lisa, you could use that couch behind you if you wanted your leg higher. I like my toe pointed. So we're going to concentrate on what's happening in this back hip. So as you lunge, you're going to think of stretching the front of the hip that is elevated. You might think knee goes towards the floor, or if you are more elevated, you might think of pushing the knee back towards the chair or the couch. We'll do 2 more, really finding that tension along the front of the back hip, so the elevated leg, and then come off. So if you have a chair, move it off your mat. Or you can use it for what we're doing next. You can also use the wall for what we're doing next. So RDLs, single leg RDL, with either hands on the wall. So hands on the wall, and it looks like this. Hands on a chair, looks like this. Take that same leg back, so left leg is back. You're going to bend your right knee and stretch your left leg back. So see what it feels like to have the toes pointed a few times. See what it feels like to have the ankle flexed a few times. But regardless, can you find that stretch, creating tension along the front of your hip? Take 1 or 2 more. And then come back down to the floor. So coming back to that, I don't know what this is called. Knees 90 degrees, hips deeply flexed. We're going to go straight into moving the hips, go side to side. And notice the difference side to side. And the next time you rock to the left, stay to the left. Find left knee in line with left hip. And more importantly, right hip in line with right knee. So it's not forward, it's back. And then come down onto your left elbow. Create tension first. So start to lengthen the front of your hip by stretching through your knee. And then lift the knee off the ground. Keep the knee where it is, but bend and straighten it. So again, I have my right hand on the front of my right thigh so that I know I'm not doing this, right? I'm trying to keep just the bending of the knee. But each time you straighten it, can you feel like you're reaching either through your toe to get length and strength or through your heel? And notice which one you like the best. And then bend the knees, stack the knees, bring the knees back. So they're not straight in line with your hip, but they're slightly in front of your hip. Right hand to your waist, As you lift, you're thrusting the hips forward by pushing the knees forward. So at this top, I'm stacked and my knees and my hips are in line. And then I have to take my hips back to set them down. So lift and reach back. Lengthen and reach back. Let's do 3 to 5 more, depending on your speed. Each time you lift, reaching that right knee to create that length in the front. Last one. And then bend the right knee, left knee forward again. Come now into that shin box. You can use your hands, or you can see, can you find that core line to lift all the way up? Squeeze the glutes, and then use that strength to dip you back. Lift up, push the knee down, reach back. Let's do 3 to 5 more. See if you can use the movement of the day to create the lift. So you find that core to hip connection. Good. And bring both hands to the ground. Step your left leg up. Tuck your right toes under. Hinge forward. Straighten the back leg by creating that tension, and then step all the way up. Good. So you can use the blocks the same way. Whatever you did on the first leg, do the same with the second leg. So we're going into the Bulgarian split squats. So feet back, right foot either stacked on your blocks or front of the right foot on a higher surface. Do 5 to 8 Bulgarian squats with awareness of the front of the back hip. So really reaching the knee down towards the floor, maybe even thinking of pushing it towards the wall or the blocks behind you, the chair. Good. And then moving into the RDL, either hands on the wall or hands on the chair. So left foot is forward, take your right foot back. Bend your left knee and keep your back leg all the way from the front of your hip to the heel or the toe, one straight line. Good. Move the chair if you have one. So we're going to go to weights now. We are going to we're going to use the weight. So you can redo those things. We don't have enough time to redo those with a weight, but you can redo those with either one weight or 2 weights. But we're going to do a swing. And if you have a kettlebell is always more comfortable to do a swing with. But if you don't, you can hang your dumbbell between the middle fingers. So take your feet wide, a little wider than hip distance apart. Feet are parallel. I'll show you from this angle so you can see. You're going to allow the hips to go back as you swing the bell between your legs. And then as you come up fast and swing the bell forward. So it looks like this. And you're creating the tension. Each time you stand up, you're pushing down through your feet and creating that tension on the front to get that hip pop and stability in your leg, in your lower body. Let's do 3, 2, 1, done. And then go ahead and come down to the ground. So those are things that you might play with, to experiment with all 3 of those strength moves. Maybe 1 or 2 more reps if you are feeling it at the end of class. But we're going to lengthen stuff out. So take your block and come on to your back. You can have both blocks close by. This kind of depends on your height. So we're going to start with the block at the lowest height. Rest it underneath your pelvis, and then let your pelvis, not your low back, rest heavy into the block. Stretch the back of your neck, so move your chin towards your throat. And then maybe take the block up to the next height. And what we're looking for is you want the front of your hip to almost be flat. If you feel like you have a lot of tension in your neck, take the block lower. And then start to walk your toes to the bottom edge of your mat. We're not walking to where the legs are straight. We're walking to where we feel the first sign of a stretch in the front of the hips. We want to hold a little bit of, we don't want it to be hard like we have the whole class. We want more an opening, whereas if we took the legs straight, you would have more of that hardness. So just walk to that edge where you can still remain soft at the front of your hips. We're going to stay here for about 10 breaths. Let the breath move in your belly. Maybe feeling it in your low back. If you feel like you have to hold too much tension anywhere, just simply walk the feet back or lower the block down to a lower level. Take 2 more breaths. And then walk your feet in a little bit closer to the block. Lift your hips, remove the block, lower your hips to the ground, and stretch your legs long. And take just a few moments to check in with both sides of your body. Think of the beginning of the practice, the balance beam, noticing how close different parts of your body are to the floor that you noticed were further away from the floor than the other side, and just kind of check in and see, has anything shifted? And you can stay here if you would like, or go ahead and bend the knees. and roll to either side to press yourself up. And this concludes this interesting exploration of how the core and the front of your hip and leg connect. This one can be really challenging. So if you found that it was challenging, this one is a little bit more subtle than some of the other things we've explored, but hopefully you were able to find some strength and stability by finding that line of tension. And thank you.